All right, so today we're going way back in time to those British public schools.
Ah, yes, those legendary
You go
institutions.
like Eton and Harrow.
Names that just exude tradition and prestige.
Exactly, and today we're going to dig into their roots and discover a history that's,
Let's be honest.
yeah, a lot more complex and a lot rowdier than you might think.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about rebellious students,
Yeah,
brutal punishments, and a curriculum that's really steeped in those
it's
classics.
like imagine, if you will, Dead Poet Society meets Gladiator, you know.
But with that distinct British accent, of course.
Of course. So to guide us through this deep dive, we have two fantastic sources.
Yeah, we'll be drawing insights from an episode of The Rest is History.
Oh, a great podcast.
It is. And this particular episode has historians Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland just delving into the real nitty-gritty of these institutions.
I love those guys.
They're great.
And believe it or not, we're going to bring in another layer.
Oh.
We're going to compare and contrast this history with Hogwarts.
Really? From the Harry Potter series?
Yeah, from Harry Potter.
That's interesting.
Because, as fantastical as Hogwarts may be, it does reflect some interesting parallels
Yeah.
to the values and maybe even some of the myths
Yeah.
that have come up around these British public schools.
Over the centuries.
Exactly. So to start from the beginning,
Rough.
let's imagine Europe in the 14th century.
Okay.
The Black Death has just swept through and devastated the continent.
And it really left a huge void in the clergy.
It was a major problem because, at the time, the church was really like the foundation,
The bedrock
the bedrock of life.
of everyday life.
And this is where we have this really ambitious guy named William of Wykeham.
Okay.
So this guy was a scholar, and he worked his way up and became the Bishop of Winchester.
Wow.
And in 1382, he founded Winchester College. And his aim was to educate these poor, bright boys for the church.
It was a revolutionary idea at the time.
It was. Right.
Because, widespread education just wasn't the norm
Right.
back then.
Exactly. So Wickham had this idea to make Winchester like this pipeline to replenish the clergy after the Black Death.
Yeah.
And his model really took off. And Eton College, founded by King Henry VI in 1440,
Wow.
quickly became like the most prestigious
Oh, wow.
of these new schools. And both Eton and Winchester had this like monastic, very Spartan focus.
It's so fascinating how these institutions that started because of a need to rebuild the church
Right.
became, synonymous with power and privilege.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Same thing.
And speaking of which, in Britain, when you say public school, it actually means private.
Oh, right. That's that historical quirk.
It is a little quirk.
Yeah.
So the term public comes from these schools being set up as charitable trusts.
Right.
Which means they were, in theory, open to anybody who qualified.
In theory, yeah.
But our historians, pointed out that the sons of the wealthy and connected always found a way in.
Regardless of how, good they were academically.
Exactly. So you have this charitable mission, but also this way of, keeping the social hierarchy
Right.
in place.
So a bit of a contradiction right from the start.
Right from the start. Yeah. So let's get into the actual education that these boys received early on.
Again.
At both Winchester and Eton.
Yeah.
They had this very strict religious ethos.
Okay.
Like austere living conditions, Latin was the main language, and a rigid code of conduct.
It makes you think back to those Hogwarts houses.
It does.
It was almost like a much stricter version of Ravenclaw, maybe with a lot of religious instruction.
I can see that.
Yeah.
So the goal was really to shape these boys for roles in the church or for the administration.
Royal administration.
Exactly. And then comes along the 16th century, and this school called Merchant Tailors kind of shakes things up.
Oh, so.
They bring in this well-rounded education.
Really?
Yeah, inspired by Renaissance humanism,
Oh, wow.
which, celebrates the potential of the individual and emphasizes a lot of different intellectual pursuits.
That was a major shift in European thought at the time.
It was.
Yeah.
And Merchant Tailors was really one of the first schools to embrace it. Instead of just focusing on Latin grammar and theology, they bring in sports, music, even drama.
Things that those older, more traditional schools
Yeah.
probably would seen as just like frivolous.
Exactly. And get this, Thomas Kidd,
Who's that?
he was a playwright
Oh, okay.
who wrote The Spanish Tragedy.
Oh, wow.
That was a famous Elizabethan play. He was a Merchant Tailor's boy.
Really?
Yeah. And they even performed for Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, wow.
So you can really see how public schools started to, embrace a wider range of talents and
Right.
ambitions.
Yeah, going beyond just churning out clergymen.
Exactly.
Mm.
But as these schools became more prominent
Yeah.
and more popular,
Mm-hmm.
things took a bit of a dark turn. They
Oh.
got a reputation for their, let's say, robust approach to discipline.
Okay, so the 17th and 18th centuries.
Yeah.
Not exactly peaceful times at those British public schools.
Yeah. No, and we're not just talking about, like, normal schoolyard fights.
Yeah, oh,
This
no.
was widespread violence.
Yeah, and not always just student on student.
Right. It was brutal punishments from teachers.
Yeah.
Prefects with too much power and, like, hazing rituals that would make anyone cringe.
Oh my gosh.
So remember those tin gloves we mentioned earlier?
Oh, yeah.
At Winchester, they made the younger boys hold these scorching hot branding irons to, like, toughen up their hands.
It's a way of preparing them for the menial tasks, they'd have to do.
Right.
Wow.
And if you think that's bad,
What else could there be?
at Eton, they had this tradition where they would chase new students through the countryside
Oh, no.
while older boys shot at them with pistols.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
That's just highlighting just how harsh life really was in these institutions.
Yeah,
They really prized this, like, physical and psychological toughness.
exactly.
And those rituals, they seem barbaric to us now.
Totally.
But back then, that was, like, essential
Yeah, to build character.
to build character, yeah.
And the students weren't just passive in all of this.
Oh, right.
Remember that Winchester Rebellion in 1793?
Yeah.
The students got fed up with the bad conditions
Yeah.
and the punishments, and they armed themselves with anything they could find, swords, pistols.
Wow.
They took the warden hostage,
Oh, my gosh.
and they faced off against the militia.
Seriously?
Yeah, and this wasn't just an isolated thing.
Oh, wow.
Public school history is full of these student revolts,
Wow.
usually to push back against stricter rules or to, limit the power of the prefects.
You've got to imagine trying to control a bunch of teenagers who've read all those classics, know
Yeah.
how to use weapons,
Mm-hmm.
and are totally fine with, using violence to get what they want.
It's kind of this weird contradiction, isn't it?
Yeah.
These schools were made to instill order and discipline,
Yeah.
but they ended up being these breeding grounds for rebellion and chaos.
Right.
It makes you think maybe those classical texts with all their stories of heroes and rebels
Yeah.
might have played a role.
That's exactly what Sandbrook and Holland debate, and the rest is history.
Right.
Like, did those stories of, Spartans and Roman generals
Yeah.
with their focus on power and strength actually lead to this culture of violence?
Like a chicken or the egg kind of thing.
It really is.
It's hard to answer, but it definitely gives you something to think about.
It does.
So speaking of which, we mentioned that merchant tailors embraced Renaissance humanism
Mm-hmm.
and that, well-rounded approach,
Right.
but that didn't really catch on right away.
Oh, so a lot of the older, more established schools just stuck with the traditional curriculum.
Yeah, which was all about the classics.
Yeah, all that Greek and Roman stuff, the literature, the philosophy, the history.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about learning the material.
Yeah.
It was about absorbing those values in the text.
The stoicism, the duty.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
All those qualities that they thought were important for future leaders.
Right, and that's where the Hogwarts connection gets so interesting.
Tell me more.
All the values that Dumbledore's always talking about, like the courage and the loyalty and the selflessness and fighting for the greater good,
Right.
it's almost like a direct echo of those classical ideals.
But it's interesting because even in a magical world,
Yeah.
those values don't always translate into a nice, neat reality.
Right. Hogwarts, just like real public schools, has all those conflicts and power struggles.
Exactly.
It's not some perfect utopia.
Right. So we have these schools steeped in tradition, grappling with violence, and trying to shape these young men for leadership roles.
In this rapidly changing world,
Yeah, it really makes you wonder where things go from here.
well, that's where Dr. Thomas Arnold steps in.
Oh, yeah.
Headmaster of rugby school in the 19th century.
He was a key figure in reforming the public school system.
Yeah, he really was.
So Dr. Arnold, the man who decided that maybe chasing students with pistols
Right.
wasn't the best way to build character.
Quite forward thinking for his time.
He was. So tell me more about this revolution.
Oh, with pleasure. Welcome back to our exploration of these British public schools. Before we went down that rabbit hole of curriculum and rebellion, we were talking about Dr. Thomas Arnold
Right, Dr. Arnold.
and his impact on rugby school.
Yeah, the reformer who thought that maybe chasing students through the countryside with pistols wasn't the best way to build character.
Indeed, very forward-thinking for the time.
He was ahead of his time, for sure.
So let's delve a little deeper into the specifics of his
Yeah,
reforms.
like, what exactly did he change, and how did people react?
Well, the first thing Arnold really focused on was moral and religious education.
Oh, okay.
He believed that Christianity should be like the bedrock of the curriculum.
So less conquering Gaul and more, turning the other cheek.
Exactly. But it wasn't just about, teaching the doctrine.
Right.
He wanted his students to have a genuine sense of, Christian morality and social responsibility.
Okay.
He really believed that these young men were going to be leaders in society and that they needed a strong moral compass.
Right, and this is where he introduced the prefect system, right?
Yes, that was another one of his key innovations.
Tell me more about that.
Instead of relying only on teachers for discipline, Arnold gave senior students, the prefects, the power to, maintain order
Wow.
and uphold the values of the school.
Okay, so it was a way to foster leadership.
Yeah, and promote responsibility.
But giving teenagers that much power sounds a little risky.
Oh, it definitely was a gamble.
Did it work?
From what we know, it was actually quite successful.
Interesting.
Arnold chose his prefects very carefully.
He didn't just pick anyone.
No, he looked for boys who were not only smart,
Right.
but also had strong morals and leadership potential.
So kind of like choosing head boys and girls, but with more emphasis on, moral character.
Exactly. And these prefects, they weren't just there to enforce the rules.
All right.
They were also mentors to the younger boys.
Oh, wow.
So they helped create a real sense of community and responsibility.
It's pretty fascinating how a system that's, clearly hierarchical was trying to create this sense of shared values.
Yeah, and responsibility.
I see that.
It really shows how complex Arnold's approach was.
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to get rid of the power dynamics.
Right.
He was just trying to make them, well, more ethical and
that's
give
good
them
sense.
more purpose.
How did the students react to all these changes?
Well, I'm sure some of them weren't happy.
Yeah, I bet some of the students who were used to, a little more freedom
A little more freedom, yeah.
probably pushed back.
Oh, absolutely. Especially those who like the old ways.
Yeah.
But, Arnold, he was a very charismatic guy.
Right.
And very persuasive.
So he won over some of the skeptics.
Yeah, a lot of them. And, we have to remember that Arnold wasn't working in isolation.
Oh, right. He was a product of his time.
Exactly. 19th century Britain was changing rapidly.
Right, with the Industrial Revolution and the expanding British Empire.
Yeah, there was this feeling that the old way of doing things just wasn't working anymore.
So Arnold realized that these boys who were going to be leaders needed a different kind of education.
Right. One that prepared them not just to rule,
Yeah.
but to lead with, morality and vision.
Right.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like he could see the complexities of the 20th century coming.
Yeah.
A century where those old hierarchies and power structures were going to be seriously challenged.
And that brings us back to the comparison with Hogwarts.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more.
So Hogwarts is a magical world, of course.
Right.
But it has a lot of the same social dynamics and challenges that we see in real-world schools.
I see that.
Think about the house system, the competition, the pressure to fit in.
It's all there.
It is. And just like in real life, there's this constant tension between fairness
Right.
and equality,
Versus power and privilege.
Right.
And in the Harry Potter books, there's this constant struggle between those who want to keep things the same and those who want to change them.
It's a battle that happens not just at Hogwarts,
Yeah.
but in the whole wizarding world.
And it's so similar to what was happening in Victorian Britain.
It really is.
Arnold's reforms were, in a way, an attempt to answer those same questions.
Yeah.
How do you prepare leaders for a world that's changing so fast?
Right.
How do you instill morality and responsibility in an environment that often rewards, ambition and ruthlessness?
It's a good question.
It really highlights how education is about more than just learning facts.
It's about shaping character.
Yeah.
It's about helping young people to think critically.
And to deal with the complexities of the world.
Exactly. And these are challenges that we still face today.
Right. The debates about access, inclusivity, the purpose of education.
It's like those conversations are still echoing from Arnold's time.
So some things never really change.
It seems that way.
But before we get too philosophical, let's talk about the impact of Arnold's reforms.
Okay.
Did other schools follow his lead?
That's a great question, and one that we'll answer when we come back for the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the history of those British public schools.
Yeah, from their medieval beginnings to the reforms that Dr. Thomas Arnold made at Rugby.
Right. It's pretty remarkable how his ideas about character development and moral responsibility changed these institutions.
Yeah, moving away from those sometimes brutal practices of the past.
But did his ideas stick? Did other schools actually follow his lead?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting because his ideas, while they faced some resistance at first, but
Okay.
became super influential, they basically laid out the blueprint for what we now think of as the traditional British public school system.
Wow, so his legacy goes way beyond rugby.
It does, yeah. His emphasis on building character, the prefect system, the importance of sports and extracurricular activities, all of that became like the standard for public schools across Britain.
And as those schools produced, generations of
In
leaders,
politics, business, the
yeah,
military,
Arnold's ideas spread all over.
throughout the British Empire.
Wow. It's incredible how one person's vision can have such a huge impact.
It is.
But we can't forget that these schools, even with their aspirations,
Yeah.
were still part of a system of privilege and exclusivity.
Right. That's the ongoing tension, the ideal of meritocracy versus the reality of inherited advantage.
Yeah.
And even though Arnold tried to instill a sense of social responsibility in his students,
Right.
public schools remain pretty much inaccessible to those outside a certain social class.
It's like that saying, water always finds its level.
Yeah.
No matter how much you try to change a system,
Yeah.
those with advantages tend to find a way to keep them.
Right. And that's a challenge that continues to this day, not just in Britain,
Yeah.
but in education systems all over the world. How do we create a level playing field? How do we make sure that talent and potential are recognized no matter your background?
And that question is really relevant when we think about these public schools today.
Yeah, they still hold such a significant place in British society.
Exactly. And their alumni are still in those high-level positions.
Right. They're still seen as the training grounds for future leaders.
But in today's world, that idea of what a leader is raises some really important questions.
It does, yeah.
Like, in a world that's so diverse and interconnected, what does it even mean to be a leader?
Yeah.
And how can these schools, with their long history and traditions, adapt to this changing world?
They're grappling with those very questions right now.
They are,
There's pressure for them to become more inclusive,
of course.
to reflect the diversity of modern British society. They're
Right.
being challenged to rethink their curriculum.
Yeah, to make sure it's relevant for the 21st century.
Exactly. It's not just about keeping those traditions alive.
It's about moving with the times, finding that balance between honoring the past and preparing for the future.
It is. And this is where, believe it or not, the comparison to Hogwarts becomes really interesting.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, think about how Hogwarts, throughout the Harry Potter series, is constantly dealing with change. Adapting to new threats and challenges.
Yeah, like Voldemort or those internal power struggles.
Exactly. Hogwarts is always evolving.
It is.
And just like Hogwarts, real public schools are realizing they can't be stuck in the past.
They have to change to stay relevant.
Yeah, they have to be dynamic and responsive and willing to embrace change if they want to keep producing those leaders who can handle today's world.
That's a great point. Even the most established institutions have to adapt to survive.
Right, and that's a lesson for all of us, not just schools.
It is what a fascinating conversation this has been.
It has.
We've covered so much history,
Centuries of it.
explored these iconic schools, and even found some unexpected connections with Harry Potter.
It really shows the power of education. Its ability to shape individuals and societies.
And to spark conversations that go beyond time and place.
Exactly.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into those fascinating British public schools.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you learned something new and maybe even got inspired to keep exploring this topic on your own.
Yeah, until next time, keep those minds curious and keep asking those questions.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.